another episode of Battlechat. This is Battlechat number 17. I'm recording this on the 18th of February 2019. And this evening, someone who you may not have heard talking on a podcast before, though I'm quite certain that some of you out there have probably met him or know of what he does. Because this gentleman works hard behind the scenes with the Society of Ancients, and he organises their annual conference and their annual Battle Day, which is actually a revived event from the olden days of the Society of Ancients, which he's brought back to life and is proving extremely popular. And so let me introduce you without further ado to Mr. Richard Lockwood. Good evening, Richard.
Good evening, Henry.
Great to have you on the show. Thanks so much for agreeing to come on, because I know that you had a certain sense of trepidation because you sent me an email saying, "Oh, Henry, I'm one of your patrons," which is lovely, and we'll talk about that later. But could you mention, the Society of Ancients Battle Day? It'd be quite nice. I think yours is a good medium to kind of promote the event through and everything. So I made the only response that any editor or podcast producer can, which is, well, why don't you come on the show and tell people about it yourself?
Yes, I walked right into that one, didn't I?
Absolutely. I barely covered that pit full of spikes, and you walked straight into it. So thanks ever so much for coming on. That's absolutely brilliant of you. I can see you're slightly trepidatious. This is probably taking quite an act of courage to step forward into the limelight like this. But long overdue, I say, long overdue. And I shall brandish at you my copy of Slingshot, because I am, of course, a member of the Society of Ancients and have been for a few years. I've sort of lost track of how long it's been now. It may be as long as 10 years or something. I can't remember. But the Society of Ancients, we're going to be talking about, of course, in general, in due course. But it's one of those things that for years I thought, I must become a member, get the Slingshot magazine, because some of my wargaming heroes, like Charles Grant, of course, back in the day, Phil Barker, were, in the nascent years of the Society of Ancients. So it's absolutely brilliant to have you here. So, let's kind of just kick off gently, and as I do with all my guests, because obviously you're a war gamer. What was your path into the hobby, and how come you ended up having a particular love for the Ancients era?
Right. Well, having listened to all your other podcasts, this could sound a bit dull because it's going to be quite similar, I suspect, to many of the others, in just a variation on the same theme. So I'll riff on that theme. So
yeah, that's fine.
Look, my father's father fought in the First War. He was wounded on the Somme and Passchendaele as well. He was made sergeant 3 times, broke down to the ranks twice for insubordination.
Oh my God.
Yes, and I think it runs in the family. Now, my father was fortunate enough to miss the Second War. His brother fought at Monte Cassino, but he missed it. Right. Did his national service in the RAF, and so naturally, from the age of about, I can't remember, soon I always had toy soldiers. Always, They were bought for me, and I played with them. And I have a younger brother, a couple of years younger, and before long we were setting them up and trying to find ways to adjudicate losses, shall we say, differently than just going bang, you're dead. Yeah. So throwing objects at them, firing missiles from guns, all those kind of things, without realising what we were doing.
Yeah.
But I think the true wargaming, I first came across it. I was about 10 years old. We were on holiday in Scarborough. My father, who had the odd obsession from time to time, was interested in stamp collecting at the time, bizarrely, but there we go. We went into a stamp shop in Scarborough because we were on holiday there, and he saw this shop. He said, I'll have a look in there. So I was left to wander around. I wandered to the back of the room, and there was this glass case full of what I thought looked like Airfix Napoleonics, because I had lots of them already, but they were silver. And I think they were probably Hinton Hunts, because they were about the same size as the Airfix. So they were more or less, who knows what they really were, but
that's a great name from the past, that Hinton Hunt.
They were silver anyway, and they weren't plastic, I didn't think. And the chap who was obviously looking after that section of the shop obviously saw me looking at it, came over and said, when I asked a few questions, slightly precocious 10-year-old, and he said, well, you can play games with these things. I looked perked up. I played a lot of chess at that age, and so that kind of game was interesting to me. He showed me a bookcase, and there was this book, Discovering Wargames, by, I think it was Arthur Taylor.
Oh, yeah.
Are your pages still in it? I see you're reaching for it now. Are your pages still in, or have they all fallen out?
Oh, it's there. It's in mint condition, more or less. Yes. One of the great books, John Tunstall.
No. So not the John Tunstall one.
Oh, the other one.
The green one.
Oh, okay. I know who you mean. Right. Rules for Wargaming. That one, Arthur Taylor.
Absolutely. Arthur Taylor, Rules for Wargaming.
There you go.
Yes.
It's a shame this isn't a vidcast, because obviously the listeners are going to have to imagine me just casually reaching to my old school Wargaming shelves to my right here and producing not just one, but two discovering books. These little, what size is that? It's kind of A5 or less, actually. It's just tiny little things. But Arthur Taylor, yes. Now that's fascinating, because wasn't Arthur Taylor the one who dispensed with dice rolling?
Absolutely. There are no dice involved in that book. So it was a strange thing for me to get, but I was 10 years old with this book, and all these different period rules within it.
Yeah.
And so I took them home. I spent pretty much, I think, all my ice cream money on that book. And my father said, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yep." So I purchased it, and my brother was then forced to play along with me. We tried to work out what it all meant, which, as a 10-year-old, I could read, but some of the things were a bit beyond me. But
yeah, and to be honest, with this Arthur Taylor book, even reading it now, some of his concepts were quite interesting, I think is how we would put it.
Yes, not exactly mainstream, but that was my intro to wargaming, and it wasn't long before, once I realised that wargaming existed. Naturally, I was down to the library, and I had Charles Grant's The War Game, and the Ancient War Game almost permanently out on loan. Now and then, someone else would reserve it, and I'd go back to renew it, and I'd have to give it up with a bit of a grump on my face.
I know that feeling. Yeah.
So again, I think I'm probably telling a story many people listening to this will know.
Yeah,
so I had all the originals, the Featherstone rule books, in which I think that Tony Bath had published one of his ancient sets of rules. But I think it was the Charles Grant, the Ancient War Game, that got me interested in the ancients. And then I bought Bruce Quarrie rules. The green book, the World War II Wargaming, Airfix Wargames Guide.
Oh, yes. That's up at the top right. I can't quite reach that without standing outside.
That was the next book I bought, and again, my brother and I were playing with those, and then what came next? Probably some Napoleonics. Came next. I got the Bruce Quarrie Napoleonic campaigns in miniature, I think it was.
Oh, right. So did you get that before the Airfix Guide to Napoleonic Wargaming then? The little thin one?
Yes. No, I had the red one first. You're quite right. I had the thin one first. And then I had, and I bought Tank Battles in Miniature 1, Tank Battles in Miniature 2, and so on. The first four. And actually the Russian front gaming, I did a lot of that. I got to secondary school at the age of 12, and bumped into a few guys there that were also doing micro tanks, and so we got cracking, the four of us, with more T-34s and Panther tanks than you can shake a stick at.
That's really interesting. So that you were using that Bruce Quarrie book, were you?
Absolutely.
Now that's fascinating, because it was only in my conversation the other day with Mark, which you probably listened to, by the way. Mark
I heard it. Yes.
And in the middle of the conversation, it dawned on me as I looked up at that show, oh my God, one of that Bruce Quarrie selection of the Tank Battles in Miniature is missing. And it was that one. And I can announce live on air, as it were, I went straight to eBay.
And to you on the front.
For the princely sum of, I think it was like £4 or £4.50. Here it is. If there's anyone out there called a Sid Moncrief, thank you very much for giving up your book, because I'm now the proud owner of what was your
Great
book.
Stuff. That's good to see.
It's fascinating that you would be interested in something so completely far removed from the ancients era as Bruce Quarrie's Russian front rules. That's fascinating.
it's a wargaming is a path you follow. You iterate along it, and I bought the purple book, saw the purple book in the shops, and the ancient wargame, Phil Barker's introduction.
Yeah.
So I purchased that and started to get very interested in the idea of ancient wargaming. And I had some friends we were playing Napoleonics with at the time, and the micro tanks, but we didn't have enough money to buy any more figures. We were 15 at the time, I think, and then I was playing chess still at that point, and I won a couple of tournaments in Berkshire and picked up some money for winning them.
Oh, right.
And my friend said, "There, now you can afford to buy some figures." So I sent off to Mike's Models. You remember Mike's Models?
Oh, yeah.
The rather interestingly sculpted anatomy of 15mm figures, which I still dearly love today. And I bought myself a 15mm ancient Indian army.
Oh, right.
Solely with no knowledge of the history, just the idea of elephants sort of grabbed me.
Absolutely, elephants, yeah.
And then I started to read around a bit. Phil Barker's Alexander's Campaigns in Miniature.
Oh, yes. Beautiful book.
Yeah.
Where's that one?
I bought that.
Yeah.
No, that's
the minute. I've wrong one. Hang on. This one. I've got so many on that shelf.
Yeah, that's the one. That's the one. Yeah. And that one really started me into the reading. And I just once I got hooked onto the Alexandrian period, which has always been my first love, then I was fully hooked. And I say I've never looked back. Although interestingly, I didn't know the Society of Ancients existed at that time. So I'm what, 16, 17, 18 at the time.
Yeah.
But just playing my own little furrow with my friends. They bought their armies and we were playing. We couldn't afford the bigger the 25mm figures.
No.
At 15, and that probably coincided with the time when things were starting to move into that. So that would have been 79 to 81, that kind of period. That when I was starting that, and so it got hold of me. And reading about Alexander, I started buying the original sources and reading them, and first in Penguin, then trying to look at the Latin and the Greek and the translations, and that was it. That was my mainstream. Now that's not to say I don't do other things as well.
Sure.
I still like the odd KV2.
Who doesn't? Yeah.
Indeed. What's not to like? It's a big beast. But I still like playing almost anything. I mean, I play anything, any rules, any game. I love gaming generally, but Ancients has always been my first love.
Oh, so. Fantastic! In passing, you said you're getting things. Do you actually speak Latin or Greek?
Not at all. No, I try to now and then. I might try to, with someone's help, look at the actual word that's being used for something. So I have a good friend who did classics at Cambridge and very handily can translate it for me now and then if I take something to him.
Oh, how nice!
Actually, that was 20 years ago. He could do it pretty easily.
Yeah.
20 years later, he's a bit less good. But, that's what you get for time, I guess.
I know, but it's the same with any language, let alone a classical language. Absolutely, gosh. And of course, it's ancient Greek as well, which is not quite the same as modern Greek. And
right, yeah. So I don't do too much of that these days. No, to be honest, I just let people like Duncan Head do all of that because he's far too good. I just ask him. I just drop him a line and say, Duncan, what do you think about this? And he'll write back and give me his latest. So he's top man.
Yeah, Duncan Head, of course, has been around in the ancients hobby for a long time. I mean, gosh.
Yes, he wrote that seminal book, The Armies and Enemies of the Macedonian Punic Wars, or the Armies of the Macedonian Punic Wars.
That's it.
You're going to reach for that one. You've got them all, haven't you, Henry? Is there a book I'm going to mention tonight that you have? Yeah, you've got that one too. Armies of the Macedonian. Yeah.
Well, I mean, they're just. I mean, gosh, when was this first written? This was 1982.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It is still one of the most extraordinary pieces of reference work. I mean, that whole series of WRG books.
Yeah.
But that one, I mean, I'm holding this, and gosh, I mean, it's quite a lump, isn't it? It's like nearly 200 pages, 192 pages, with every army with something said about it, its weapons, its tactics, diagrams, shield diagrams, weapons, costumes, uniforms. It's just
Yeah.
an amazing piece of reference material, and that together, I mean, a bit like you. I mean, if obviously we're going to dwell a lot tonight on the ancients period,
Yeah.
because I think there's a lot of people out there who don't realise how much I loved ancients. I mean, your path, you mentioning there kind of 15 mil ancients back when you're at school and stuff, and that's how I started in ancients. I mean, well, I don't really count the early days of the Airfix Romans and ancient Britons on the carpet, and then I did play a few games when I was in my early school days, so I would have been really quite young. But that was because of, bless his heart, where is he? Charlie Wesencraft's Practical Wargaming, which is on, lurking on my desk somewhere, because I'm oh, here, there it is. It's over there. I don't know if you ever
You can't
saw.
find it, listeners. It's the first one you couldn't find tonight.
It's on the other side of my desk.
No,
That's why.
he's got it. He's got that one as
I've
well.
got it with me. But in here, I don't know if did you ever see this book, Richard?
I possess it. It's on my shelf.
It's actually fascinating because it was the first time I'd seen the notion of figures being mounted on multiple bases. And more to the point, on lino tile bases as well. Back in the days when you could buy lino tiles, linoleum tiles, without the sticky stuff on the underside, which you can still buy them with the sticky stuff nowadays, but trying to find them without the sticky stuff is an absolute nightmare. It was actually a fantastic material if you could get past the slightly funny smell that it had, because you could just score it and then snap it to whatever size you want. It was great stuff, and of course you could buy it in sort of green or whatever. But yes, my Airfix Romans and Ancient Britons were those ancient Britain sets that Airfix did with those wonderful solid wheel chariots, as if there was some kind of cross between a chariot and an ox cart, Should have been pulled by onagers in ancient Assyria, probably. But that was when I first did game in the ancient era with, as I say, the Airfix 1/72 HOOO scale figures. But it was when I got to school and then there was a war games club there, and older boys were saying, "Oh no, we don't do that sort of thing. First of all, oh no, we use metal figures in this new scale," and they all had miniature figurines, early minifigs, 15 mil figures, and we use these rules by these people called the Wargames Research Group, with this saintly figure of, Lord Philip Barker,
St. Phil.
who, bless his heart, had written these rules. Now, back then, it must have been, the first ones I played must have been 3rd or 4th edition, something like that, I imagine. And then later on, I progressed to using 5th and 6th, and then it all went squiffy and changed completely. It was sort of the pre-DB X phase from edition 7 onwards, wasn't it? But yes, 15 mil figures, and there was a guy there who, there was already a kind of a Romans guy, and there was already an Egyptians guy, and there was already, so I looked at what no one had, and Persians, they sound fun. Achaemenid Persians.
Achaemenid Persian, yes.
Absolutely adore Achaemenid Persians. And the great thing about Achaemenid Persians is you can do kind of early period against, the Greek city-states, hoplites and stuff, or later period against Macedonians and so on. And that's when my real love of ancients burgeoned. It was really at that time I started actually reading stuff about ancient tactics and what have you, trying to find out information. And of course, back in those early days of the early 70s, the fact is there just wasn't that much information out there, was there?
And that's what Duncan Head's book,
absolutely,
that brought into that. I know Phil Barker had written an earlier version of it, but Duncan's book was probably nothing like that would probably ever be written again, I suspect.
Absolutely. Well, it was Duncan's book and this one, Charles Grant, because you mentioned Charles Grant's The Ancient War Game, which actually had some Achaemenid Persians on the front cover, doing their parade at Persepolis or wherever it might have been, with some chariots in the background as well. But of course, the disadvantage back in those days was that was the only colour photograph in the book. So for someone who's thinking, oh, Persians, they look great, and then inside there was a quite a big battle. Was there? I can't remember. Was there marathon or something in here with featuring ancient Persians? But
Yeah.
it's all in black and white, which of course is the
It's,
conversation I've had with other people about Charles Grant's The War Game, where you've got that lovely picture of these marching figures looking very majestic on the cover on Charles Grant's absolutely almost a billiard table, flat green table with contour hills. But then that's the only colour photo in the book. So as a frustrated youngster, when those WRG things started coming out, and of course there were articles in, I'm thinking back, it would have been military modelling and then Battle for War Gamers probably
yeah.
particularly, where they had kind of the uniform info sections and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But it's, I think this is one of the things these days that us slightly older generation of games, we look at youngsters and they want their games in a box. Oh, you're not a proper war gamer unless you've suffered. You couldn't finish painting your Achaemenid archers for 6 months until you knew exactly what colour that tunic was.
Yeah. That's yeah. It's I mean, I think those of us of a certain age. I'm mid-50s, and we all grew up with that kind of background. And I probably was a little bit lucky because by the time I was doing it, there was that little bit more information coming through, and Duncan's book coincided pretty much with me getting really starting to get going. So.
Yeah. No, that's an absolutely brilliant book, and I'm glad we've had the opportunity to mention that. So, I mean, this is wonderful. I will also ask, kind of out of order of our show notes here, but the Macedonians, Alexander's Macedonians. So, what particularly kind of fired your imagination about him and that army?
Rather quaintly, I had the Ladybird book of Alexander the Great. I don't know whether you recall those books.
Oh my God! How can I forget Ladybird books? Yeah.
Have you got that one on your shelf?
I don't know if I've got Alexander the Great. You're gonna. Oh God, you're gonna. I think it. No, it's not even on this shelf here. I'm shocked and horrified. Have I not got that here?
Ladybird book, Alexander the Great. Never mind. But that was I'd remembered. I was aware of him from very young. And, but it was actually Phil Barker's description of his campaigns and the battles in that book, in the book we've mentioned already. Patrick Stevens Limited published Alexander's campaigns in miniature. And I think it was just, he wrote very easily, and I just fell in love from that. And as I started to read about the bits and pieces, I did more research. With Duncan's book published, Duncan quoted all these research papers and papers that had been published in various journals, which I then started to source from the library to read them for myself.
Right.
And so I just, it was just a rolling boulder down the hill, and there wasn't anything going to stop it. So I bought so after having bought the Indians from Mike's Models, I bought Macedonians from Mike's Models. Right. But of course I then got hold of Duncan's book, and I realised all the figures were wrong. They'd been based on probably Phil Barker's original book, and now Duncan had come out. I thought, oh no! So they were all put aside into a box. I still have many of them sitting in a box somewhere.
Oh, seriously?
In the garage. Wow. And I then had to hunt for the right figures, and so I settled on Essex 15mm figures at the time. So I painted that army up, and I'm now painting my third Alexandrian Macedonian 15mm army, because I bought some figures from Zyston, and I've started.
Figures,
although it's one of the many projects I've got going. But I've got two Achaemenid Persian armies, and I've got them in 28mm as well now, and so on and so forth. So I do love that period.
It sounds to me as if you're as dedicated as I am with kind of the 7 Years' War era, where I've got the same armies repeated in different scales, and it's madness, utter madness. But the Macedonian is really interesting because there was a lad at school who I fought against regularly, who he had the Alexandrian Macedonians. Oh, the bloody phalanxes, and as the Persian player, just this feeling that that damn thing is unstoppable. That thing just keeps marching on, marching on. And the best you can do is just try and get it to spin round on the spot by milling your cavalry around it and trying to pepper it with archery. But it was very frustrating. Particularly, I think the problem at school was as well. We only had our pocket money to spend, so our armies were relatively small. And I think the Achaemenid Persian army is one where you need lots of them. If you're actually going to, if they're going to be effective at anything, you need lots of Achaemenid Persians.
Absolutely. I mean, I always say, I have now and then I've played the odd sort of competition type game, and the idea as a Persian player that you would take an equal points army is bizarre.
Yes.
That as Darius III, if the opponent's turning up with 400 points, he'd say, well, I'm turning up with 1,200.
Absolutely.
Because I'll just call them all up. And so why would I fight with 400 myself? I'm going to bring all the chaps. So I absolutely sympathise. The Persian player should always have 3 times as many troops as the opponent.
I completely agree.
Absolutely.
I mean, for 2 reasons. First of all, so you can stand a chance. And secondly, because they look gorgeous. I mean, the thing that attracted me to the Persians, of course, was all that cavalry. I've always loved cavalry ever since I was, the first things I can remember about collecting toy soldiers. There's something about cavalry that is a real kind of turn on for me. And of course, the Persians not just the fact they've got lots of cavalry, but just such a wild variety of the stuff as well.
Yeah, and they're great as well.
Oh my God.
So colourful, and you can paint them, they can look fantastic.
Absolutely. And also, going back to that era where there's lots of bronze in evidence, and the early cataphracts as well, where there's lots of kind of bronze lamellar armor and that kind of stuff. And also, it's a really interesting thing, I think, for any war gamer who's interested in military history to try out, because of course we're used to the age of stirruped cavalry and Normans onwards, where you've got a lance and you charge in and thump and you kebab 3 people in a row kind of thing. And of course it's the Persian kind of cataphracts and stuff look impressive, and they've got that enormous kontos, but of course it's held in a completely different way. It's not couched underarm, and charging at full tilt. It's usually held with 2 hands and thrust overhead, isn't it?
That's right.
Which is also, I can remember, because there was the illustrations in Duncan's book, and also I think Phil had used a couple of those illustrations in this Alexander the Great's campaigns of those cavalry acting that way, and that was a revelation to me at the time. I'd always thought of as lancers as you do, French lancers at Waterloo kind of thing, and so suddenly realizing, it's a very different thing, and therefore their tactics are going to have to be very different. This isn't a unit that's rising to the gallop and charging in at full tilt, and smashing their way through in the same way as you'd kind of imagine cavalry to act. Yeah. And I think this is one of the things that's also fascinating about the Ancients era as a whole, isn't it? That there's still a lot of speculation. You're still looking literally at the archaeological evidence and trying to figure out, well, okay, how did people actually use this stuff? What were their tactics like? So it's an era where there's still a lot of speculation, and is that something you enjoy, or is it something you find frustrating?
No, I enjoy it. I must say. I mean, keeping tabs on what the latest thoughts are. So I was chatting with Duncan Head a little while ago about the Indian army, because one of the battles we fought a couple of years ago was the Hydaspes. Mm-hmm. The Alexander invading India, having vanquished the Persians, and I was asking Duncan, what's the latest? Has there been any more research? And he was talking a little bit about the Indian and the Indian archer. I did a little bit of research myself into it, but he's sort of, if you like, written an update section on the Indian archer. So taking the book that you showed earlier, but he wrote an article for Ancient Warfare magazine.
Oh, right, yes, excellent magazine.
He's written a few recently. I think I can't recall how many, 3 or 4, I think. But one of them certainly was about the Indian archer, and he kind of bringing up to date his thinking on that. Sometime last year it would have been, and I think it was last year.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was within the last couple of years, sure, certainly, and very good article, and but some things had changed. The evidence that we'd had, the original thoughts was your archer effectively had a long bow, big bamboo long bow, and he carried a two-handed sword at his waist, and would he'd put the bow down and come and chop you up. And the kind of evidence has come away that wasn't the bamboo bow wasn't quite as powerful as that. In fact, it was sometimes not great at all, and also those that were armed with the two-handed sword were pretty few and far between. So it just changes the way you think about them as a group. So instead of being fantastic troop types, that would have been 15, 20 years ago, they're now actually pretty ordinary bowmen. So
what a shame.
But I love the way it evolves. With the way the Alexandrian Macedonian cavalry and what we know about them and the way we think about them. There's been so much speculation over the years, but it's all grist to the mill.
I mean, that's really interesting because thinking back to school and looking through the WRG rules and the army lists and stuff for the first time. I suppose as someone in my early teens, like everyone else, you let's be honest, we were kind of looking for the super army, and there were certain kind of troop types that would kind of suddenly come to the fore. Oh yes, they've got this two-handed cutting sword, and they're extra heavy infantry, and they're basically almost unstoppable. If they're this meat grinder, and if you happen to get too close to them, bad luck you. You're just going to get chopped to bits. Which I think is also how, mentioning the Macedonians and their phalanx, I think that's how a lot of people for a long time saw the Macedonian phalanx. It was just this kind of utterly unstoppable thing that no one would stand a chance against. So I find that really interesting, and the research that's been done, as you say, into things like bows, because bows come in so many different forms of straight bows and composite bows and bamboo bows and recurved bows and all the rest of it. It's one of the things I do find constantly fascinating about the Ancients era, because we think of, say, the modern era as being complex with all the different gun calibers and stuff. One of the things about the ancient period, of course, is you've got so many potential permutations. Now, you've probably heard me mention this on the show before, that for my book, I was going to include a set of ancients rules in the book. And halfway into, writing this set of rules, and I've come up with some concepts that I think work nicely, but I suddenly realized, oh my God, just the play testing of all these different potential permutations. And because knowing what wargamers are like, they're going to come up with a permutation you hadn't thought of before you went to press, right? They're going to say, oh, well, I put these against those, and it's not how it should have turned out, to my mind. So that's why in the end it ended up being an 18th century horse and musket rule set, because it's a much simpler kind of paper, scissors, stone thing. But it is one of those fascinations where, again, because we have a paucity of evidence, there's a lot of speculation, and the latest theory is constantly being updated, isn't it, about how and why the Romans fared differently against different tribes or whatever. And I imagine this is something in a process you've been through as well.
Well, I think our understanding of ancient warfare is, as you say, it can never be. We're never going to know, really. But I think there's been some great studies done. So Professor Phil Sabin, he's the book Lost Battles, which is a fantastic book in my view. Phil has been a stalwart member of the Society of Ancients for many years and sitting on the committee and so on. Good game designer as well, which he obviously includes within Lost Battles, a game system. I think some of his academic work through gameplay is very interesting and helps us understand a little bit more. But just the pace of battles, the idea that everyone would charge in, get stuck in, and they carry on fighting for hours until it can't have been like that. There must have been lulls. There must have been.
As an ex-reenactor, I can tell you it definitely wasn't like that.
Well, exactly, and so I think there's a lot to be said for reenactment, for academic research, and for war games and gaming as a test process. All of that to come together, and I think it's probably only in the last 10, 15 years where that's started to be much more the case, where people have been getting. my small dog. I'm very sorry about that, everybody.
That's all right. Bit of
He's,
excitement on the podcast, ladies and gentlemen. Stay calm, stay calm.
Grace has identified a stranger outside. Anyway, that's good. No ghouls sneaking up on us tonight.
Your camp is safe tonight.
It isn't. Yes. But yes, I think the Society of Ancients and what people contributing to the Slingshot magazine, that always has people coming up with their latest theories, and we'll have the odd. We still have the odd argument now and then. So there's a couple of guys who've been writing about the Cambodian army.
Oh wow!
And they disagree on the interpretation of some evidence. I think it's about whether they had chariots or whether they didn't have chariots or something. I'm not even going to go there. Two lovely chaps, and but they're disagreeing on it in a very nice and friendly way. But it's.
But then that's always been the case. I mean, I'm glad you raised that. Part of the history of the Society of Ancients has to be the letters page in Slingshot, and the arguments that just ran and ran around, and sometimes spilled over as well into other organs such as Battle for Wargames. I mean, famously, correct me if I remember, Phil Barker and the fabled weapon, the Romphier.
I knew you were going to talk about the Romphier.
How could I not talk about the Romphier? Yeah, just shows I've got pedigree in this. But the arguments about the Romphier and was it this big sickle or was it a straight bladed thing or was it this or was it that? And Phil Barker and Charles Grant and other people just Tony Barth as well maybe getting involved in this thing that just ran on and on and on and on. And I seem to remember there was so little evidence for the existence of this thing at all. Was it just something on a Trajan's column, a carving or something?
It was I think it was the Thracians arguably used it, and then perhaps some of the Dacians did as well, and so from the same kind of area and so on. I mean, I was fortunate in that I wasn't a member of the society at that time, and so I only read some of those arguments in retrospect. When I did join, I bought all the back issues. And I must admit, the thought that went through my head was, those guys, they need to get out more. Because they were getting towards how many angels can dance on the head of a pin kind of argument.
Absolutely,
it was pointless, and but reading back, a bit quite amusing, really. But that was the way that research was done. People read, and they were amateur researchers, and they would put forward their views, and people would argue with them about it, and that was discovery. And
absolutely.
For those of us who are members of the society, reading those articles, that's how we learn. And
it was educational.
Tony Bath forming the society back in the 60s, and with he used to type the material,
the magazine,
I mean, type the Slingshot magazine, sent it out. Really, that was a gift to the members that for them to start understanding and learning. That was absolutely fantastic. So although it is quite funny to laugh at the points of detail that they were obsessed about, in general what they were doing was bringing to a wider audience their research discovery, and I think it was fantastic.
And I actually think that's one of the interesting things about both the Ancients era and the Society of Ancients in particular, because there is this really interesting mix of, there are people in there who are professional historians, professional archaeologists, alongside these incredibly enthusiastic amateurs who, probably spent as much time, but in their free time, reading up and studying as much as they can, and taking their holidays and going to where the digs are happening, or ancient sites and so on. And sometimes it's kind of hard to distinguish between the professional and the amateur in terms of the input they make, and also the validity of their input. And I mean, I'm just an example that most people certainly in the UK will be aware of is the TV series Time Team, which ran for years, where it was quite notable that often, particularly when it comes to local history, these professional people coming, being flown in from universities to the dig site would meet and be highly impressed by the people who were there on the ground with the local knowledge. And I find that is true, very true, certainly for the ancients era, because because, as we said earlier, there's so little actual evidence. Certainly, the written records are so thin on the ground that it comes down to interpretation, doesn't it? And also looking back to the early doyens, the Charles Grants and why, these were very learned people. These were people who were highly educated, extremely intelligent, who wrote extremely well, and could put forward a very cogent, coherent argument. And I think what's quite funny is that, nowadays on social media, we're so used to people descending very quickly to kind of slanging matches of a really quite unpleasant kind. Looking back at those editions of Slingshot, however heated in inverted commas the argument became, it was all terribly polite, wasn't it?
Absolutely, it was very polite, and I think we can. I look back a little bit with some nostalgia to the age when new theories were tested over time, and there was correspondence backwards and forwards. Now everything, anyone can put up a theory on social media, on forums, and so on, and it can be argued backwards and forwards by almost anybody. Now, the almost anybody piece is good because everyone can have access, but it's also bad because anybody can say what they think and claim something, and there is a question about what their provenance is. If you submit a paper for publishing in a journal or so, or you get proper peer review, it goes through a process, and you don't get that. You cannot get that on some forums and things, and so I do have a little bit of nostalgia for the past when it was a little bit more controlled. But on the other hand, the fact that everyone can get access now is just tremendous, and it's I think on balance it's a good thing. But you just do have to be a little bit careful about new ideas and new theories, because a lot of them have been stated before, have been proven wrong, discussed, and so on.
I know. I mean, it's like at the moment there's a thing where the growth of people who are flat earthers, which is just, and if something like that can come back, God knows what can come back. I'm really with you on what you're saying there, because talking about, thinking about the role of the Society of Ancients and the role of Slingshot magazine, I can, as a magazine editor, as an ex-magazine editor, I can talk with a reasonable degree of authority, at least about the magazine side of things, where the word we're looking for in amongst all that is gatekeepers. I'm in this interesting position where the modern world, modern technology has made self-publishing wonderfully easy. Anyone can publish whatever they want in whatever medium they want, whether it's just purely digitally online on a blog or something, or in print, go and get it print on demand, or send it down to a digital printer, which is a fantastic thing. When I think of when I first started Battlegames back in 2006, and God, the expense of the print run, and then the terror of, oh my God, I hope we sell them all, because they're all sitting in a warehouse, being charged for the storage space as well. That, as I think I mentioned to Rich Clark, and we agreed that, if I were you, I wouldn't start from here. If I was going to do it again, I would do it completely differently. And Patreon, of course, is one example of this, giving me the opportunity to do it completely differently. But one of the things that I think we are already starting to miss is this notion of the gatekeeper. Is this notion of, as you said, that the peer review, this notion that as a magazine editor, one of your functions is to sift the wheat from the chaff. That if someone sends something in that it might, if you're lucky, look immediately preposterous, and you think, well, I'm not going to print that. But also, you've got a broad knowledge of, of military history and that kind of thing, and you can just, do you know what? That sounds very much like something that someone else submitted to me a couple of years ago. Oh, is there some plagiarism involved here? Or No, that doesn't sound right to me. I think that's bunk. And I'm lucky. I've got the book collection, and I know how to research online, so I can, my first line of defence would be to go back to the person who submitted that article and say, oh, are you aware of this other thing that actually disproves that thing you claim there? And with luck, they say, oh God, no, I didn't. Thanks very much for pointing that out, and they'll, you know.
Mm.
So the role of the publisher, the role of the gatekeeper is an extremely important one. And one of the problems we have nowadays is that art and that role is dying out because even highly regarded publishing companies are under such pressure nowadays that they're making redundancies. They're not getting the profits. They're not happy. They can't afford the staff anymore. Some of the staff they had in-house, they're now relying on freelancers. And then sometimes you look at some books from big name companies and you think, God, has this even been proofread? Littered with errors, which is both shocking and sad.
Yes.
Something I feel about. So I would have thought, Richard, that that's a really important role that the Society of Ancients plays, is that there's a certain, if something appears in Slingshot, it's like it's got some kind of kite mark that basically, this is a valid opinion for this person. Even if it's a controversial opinion for someone to hold about something, it's actually a valid opinion that's worth discussing. Would that be fair to say?
I think it is to some extent, and I qualify that by saying the editor of Slingshot has traditionally had supreme control, and so
right.
They have the right to make the decision on what to publish and what
Sure.
not to publish. And I think the editor can only publish what material that gets sent in.
And that sounds familiar.
Yeah, indeed. And so to some extent, if there aren't enough articles, they all get published. So there is some quality control, of course there is, and the editor has that responsibility to make sure that he's reasonably comfortable with what's been published. But I think and I would say, going back over the editors that I've known over the years, some of them have different. Some of them are more zealous on that, and others are a little less zealous. And it's hard to argue because, frankly, we need someone to step up and do the job. It's voluntary. It's not unpaid. Yeah. We have a great chap, Justin Swanton, who actually is based in Durban, South Africa.
Oh wow!
As our current editor, and he understudied a little bit for a few years as sort of helping with the layouts and things, and stepped in when Paul Innes had to step down as his academic career was taking off more. And all power to Justin. He's doing a great job. But it does depend on what comes in and what they can do and so on and so forth. So I'd like to think that there is if it's in Slingshot, then it's certainly worth a read. You may shake your head and look. I do that sometimes. I read an article and I shake my head and think, "What on earth is this?" But that's part of the fun of it. I think part of the enjoyment of reading the article. And not everything is going to. If someone's got a new theory, that's fine. I'm happy to read it. I may not agree, and that's and that's partly. Actually, the Battle Day was all about interpreting battles. Everyone gets to interpret it a slightly different way, but their own spin on how they think it should be set up and played. That was partly what drove me on that.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things that magazines do is that they are provocative sometimes, and that's no bad thing to have your own beliefs and ideas challenged from time to time, even if what you end up thinking at the end of it is, nah, it is rubbish. I am reassured that actually what I think about this thing is the correct thing, or as far as it can be, given that it's the ancient theory. So that's really interesting about Slingshot. And if people aren't already subscribing, they really should. I'll put the details of how to go and subscribe to Slingshot on the show notes.
Right.
When I publish the thing. But the other thing that's noticeable about Slingshot over the years, it's now a full color thing on nice paper, and it looks very smart. It no longer is it a typewriter produced, then roneoed and stapled thing. It's a really smart, professional looking magazine that comes through. Was it 6 times a year, isn't it? It's a bi-monthly thing. and it's really nice, and it's like any other magazine. So you've got articles, you've got reviews, you've got thoughts, you've got events and what's happening. Something I'm opened at the back here, which I should be paying much more attention to, is discounts offered to society members.
Oh yes.
Perhaps we'll come back to that a bit later, because some of these discounts are really, really interesting. But we'll come back to that later. Because what I want to kind of talk in more general terms, first of all, is, so we've talked about kind of the role of Slingshot as obviously being the mouthpiece to a large extent of the society, but there is a website as well, and a forum, that's now very active. Again, I'll give the links to that. But so what do you see as, if you like, the function, the role of the Society of Ancients?
Yeah, so I think, and I guess I'm speaking for the current committee, but probably also for all the past committees, and we are all volunteers that work on the committee. We're looking to further the study of ancient history and wargaming together, the two together. And I think just to promote it, to support it, and so those twin aims, I think, of ancient history and wargaming, the two together. And by this way, when we say ancients, we call the Society of Ancients, but we really cover all the way up to gunpowder, and a tiny bit beyond, I guess, around about 1500. I mean, again, there's been arguments over the years, when should we have the cut-off date? And
but that's just like the WRG rules, wasn't it?
Just leave it alone. You can stop at 1500. You can stop at 1485. You can stop at 1520. Just leave it. Anyway, I'm fairly easygoing on these things. I don't feel the need to be too. But it's ancient and medieval, and I think we all have our own idea about when medieval finishes. I kind of think it finishes at the end of the Wars of the Roses, broadly, but each to their own. No one should impose it. But we're trying to promote it, and I think, as you say, for many years, Slingshot was the main medium for doing that. But there was also, back in the days, the Society of Ancients Championship, where people would play games against each other. They would visit each other's houses and play the championship games, and travel miles to do so. And there were even the competitions grew up as well. And that was a way of people playing each other. But I think one of the issues I think I have with the way the world goes now is that we're all sitting as we are here. We're sitting behind the computer. We haven't met face to face to do this, and there isn't enough face to face meeting. I think that's my concern about things, and that's was partly driven behind what I did with the Battle Day and what I've subsequently done is trying to bring the conference back. It is put the society back into the society. And that's that's a bit of a personal crusade. But I think that's we've got to be careful not to lose that wargaming esprit de corps that we have by too remote. We sit in our little groups. We all have our friends we play with, and that's lovely. But sometimes the wider experience brings new ideas, brings new experiences, and I'm all for promoting that.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point, because one of the great things about the internet, of course, is, I mean, you're I'm not sure where you actually are, Richard, but you're somewhere in the UK.
I'm sitting in the village of Aldbourne, near Marlborough in Wiltshire.
Oh, right. So you're in Wiltshire. I'm in Sussex. You could just as easily be in Alabama or Australia or South Africa. So that's one of the great things about the internet. I mean, I've done podcasts with Jay Arnold, who's over in the States, in Illinois in the States, it's mind-boggling, really. It's mind-boggling that you think, gosh, yes, I feel like I'm in the lounge with them in their sitting room, and we've both got respective cups of tea or whatever it is, or glass of wine, but actually we're several thousand miles removed, which is a wonderful thing. But at the same time, as you say, that only gives the illusion, the impression of society, if you like. It's a positive for sure. It makes the world smaller in many respects, but there's nothing quite like actually getting face to face with real people in real time, in the same room
with real toy soldiers.
With real toy soldiers, absolutely, which is one of the great things about Wargame. I mean, you probably saw, probably a couple of months ago now, wasn't it? I did an a transatlantic game of Commands and Colours with Jay Arnold,
Mm.
which was incredible, really, and it was lovely. But it's like it's not quite the same.
Yeah.
And I agree. So I mean, since we're on this, you might as well tell us more about this incentive you felt to kind of rekindle the Battle Day, which had kind of died out for a
Well,
while.
the Battle Day was actually a new thing. It's the conference that was rekindled. So I'll
Oh,
come back
right,
to the
big
conference in a bit. But the Battle Day was. I was invited to join the Slingshot, the Society Committee back in probably the late 90s. A Australian chap called Steve Neate was the editor of the magazine at the time, and he'd harangued me into writing a couple of articles because I'd probably written in with some points to the guardroom as joining in some of these conversations. And so he harangued me to write a few things, and I actually started. At the time, we had a chap who and I think he was an American gentleman, but he'd written about about warfare in the Aztec period, the various South American tribes.
Oh, the Mayans and stuff.
That period, but his style of writing was not good.
Right.
And basically it needed a heavy sub-editing. And Steve would just send them to me, and I'd just try and make head or tail of what he was trying to say and put it together. We'd send it out, and it was gold. The research chap had done was absolute gold, but he just wasn't able to put it into the right readable English, if I'm being blunt. So I would sub-edit it, and I hope to God what I said was more or less what he wanted to say. But so Steve basically then said you should come on the committee. I joined the committee and turned up at a few meetings for year or two, and then I had this. I'd seen there'd been a couple of articles published in Slingshot about refighting the same battle with two different sets of rules, so contrast.
Yeah,
I think a chap called John Graham Lee had written them, who went on to become editor for a while, and that sort of stuck in my head a bit. And I thought the idea of refighting the same battle with different sets of rules, that would be quite an interesting thing to do. And so I mentioned it to the committee, and of course they just looked at me and said, "Well volunteered." Oh no!
No good deed goes unpunished.
So, and I had there's a chap, Nick Gowker, who helped me organise the first one. We bounced ideas off, and so we thought, what do we want to do here? We want to get as many people as possible in one place to refight the same battle using different sets of rules. So we get groups who would want to come with their favourite set of rules, or at least a set of rules they thought would be good to try out for that period, and we'd get everybody together and we set them off at the same time, and we'd play the game. And this came at a point. So it was 2004 was the first one.
Oh, right.
And this was a period when there'd been for many years, as we've said already, the Wargames Research Group were pretty much the only game in town for ancient wargames rules. There were some others. There was the Shock of Impact from that was an interesting set of rules, and the Newbury rules was another set.
Oh yes, I remember those well.
Did you have a large shield or a small shield? Oh my goodness me, that's a bit much, chaps. But that was all very interesting, and and what Trevor did with those rules, and he's taken them on since, is it was all. But WRG was the only game in town pretty much, and then over the years, clearly there was a proliferation of more sets and more sets and more sets, and probably by the time we got to sort of 2000, there were lots and lots of different sets of rules out there. People were the hobby had fragmented, and so you couldn't. You knew you used to be able to just turn up and you could play WRG with someone, because that's what everyone did. Whether it was all those different editions up to 7th, or whether it was a DBM thereafter. For a while, that was very popular with many people. But the proliferation meant that people weren't getting together in the same numbers. So that's a little bit about Battle Day. It was also trying to break down the my rules are better than your rules bit, which sometimes could get a bit of people a bit excited. So to bring them together at the same place to play the same people. And also there's just the intellectual curiosity. How would certain rules work actually trying to refight a real battle? And so that was the initial idea. We started out with Gaugamela. I thought, let's start with a very popular one, Alexander versus the Persians, his most famous battle probably.
Yeah.
And everyone will have Macedonian figures, won't they? And really, my personal view was everybody should have Achaemenid Persian figures too.
Absolutely.
Well, why wouldn't you? Yeah, that was our first game. We had 6 games turning up to the day. Unfortunately, one of them didn't turn up because the van broke down, lost a wheel on the way. And
Oh no!
So that was a bit of a disaster for them. But we had 5 games the first time. The next year, I think we did the Sombra, Caesar, one of Caesar's battles.
Yeah.
The following year against the Gauls and or the Belgians, I think it was. But then we got 8 games that year, and since then we've been up at anywhere between 10 and 17 or 18 games going on.
Oh wow!
Time. Yeah, we typically.
So how many people roughly is this representing being attending?
People will bring anything from just a couple of people to play it, up to there's can be 9 or 10 around some of the games in going. So it varies hugely. We typically have anywhere between 60 and 80 people in the room playing.
Oh, cool.
Which is, I think, pretty good for a day.
Yeah.
We hold it in Bletchley, same hall. We've held it at the same place every year. There's a hall in Bletchley near Milton Keynes, so it's reasonably accessible from the north and south off the M1, and so it's reasonably accessible.
Because when you say Bletchley, I immediately think of Bletchley Park.
Not so far from Bletchley Park, just down
where the Enigma machine was cracked, wasn't it?
Exactly, just down the road.
Fantastic. Now, the thing is this, I'm going to have to come to one of your battle days because it's one of the things that I love. When I was running Battlegames magazine, you probably know of him, a guy called Bob Barnettson, a Canadian guy, used to do rule set comparisons, whether it was for Ancients or Horse and Musket or whatever it was, or sometimes even bringing in a board game to see what mechanisms were useful from that. And I'm really get what you're saying here, and that point about the fragmentation of we could talk about the fragmentation of the hobby in many ways, of course, but particularly with the Ancients here, because as you say, for so long, Ancients gaming, well, there was no other game in town, really. I think back to the very early days where there was a spat between Don Featherstone and Tony Bath about whose rules would get used in 1962 or something.
World Cup or something, yes, exactly.
Absolutely. Where, in fact, there were only about a dozen Ancients players in the entire country, so, and then it kind of moved to Southampton, and then it moved to somewhere else. And then, of course, the WRG arrived, and part of that fragmentation, of course, I'm thinking there was the Phil Barker, Richard Bodley Scott kind of split, wasn't there, at some point, where Richard Bodley Scott went off and did the Field of Glory rules, which of course were supported by Osprey Publishing and took on a life of their own. That was kind of a major thing. Then of course the guys at Games Workshop set up Warhammer Historical, so you got Warhammer Ancients Battles, which ran for a couple of editions, well, sort of 3 really, because there was 1, 1.5 and 2, and 2 was a mess for all kinds of reasons. And then Warhammer Historical closed its doors, sadly, I would say, because whilst people would say, it was associated with the evil empire of Games Workshop or whatever, man, they had resources. That's one of the great things is
people should get a life when they complain about
absolutely.
That. You know what? They're a commercial business. Good luck to them, but judge the product on its values, not on its quality, not on the fact the commercial company had produced it.
And of course, and the irony is, of course, that the guys who, like the Perrys and the Alessio Cavatori and others who were involved in the Warhammer Ancients battles, they were historical wargamers first, who then got into the fantasy stuff and started working for GW. So for them, it was almost like it was a little private project where they could do what they really wanted to be doing, which was like playing with Romans and Achaemenid Persians.
Exactly.
And of course, one of the great benefits of both the Field of Glory rules and Warhammer Ancients battles, and if we concentrate on those two at the moment, is they took Ancients gaming from what had still up to that point been black and white printed, staple bound, card covered things to full color productions. And this is one of the things, of course, that triggered one of the things that we were kind of whinging about earlier, which these youngsters, they want everything in one box, don't they? where now, if you buy a book of Ancients rules, it's a beautiful thing. Hail Caesar, there's another example, of course, which has come from much the same kind of stable. They've just moved on to a different company, where you get hardback with beautiful full color illustrations showing you, it might be the only painting guide you actually need, where you've got these professional painters have done these beautiful miniatures. Which can only be to the good. Now, so you've got this kind of resurgence in the visual aspects of Ancients gaming, together with, plastic 28mm miniatures straight out of the box at a fraction of the price that we would have paid for a 28mm figure in our youth, 25 mil as it would have been then probably. And that's kind of transformed things. But as you say, also suddenly lots of people were doing this, so you couldn't count, as you say, if I took my Achaemenid Persian army down to the local club and it's all based up for Warhammer Ancients battles, and someone looks at me, well, I'm sorry mate, we play Field of Glory here, or we play Armati, or we play insert rules of choice here, so I think that's a really important point you're making, that what's been needed is this way to bring it full circle and bring the Ancients gaming community back together again. So you must be quite chuffed at what you've managed to do there.
Chuffed. I'm pleased that it's worked, and I'm pleased that everybody who comes have great fun. I mean, that the first priority is actually, my manifesto for this event is to have fun, and to bring our toys and get them out on the table and play with them, and that for me is what we're trying to do. So that is the fact that people still come, and we've got groups that have they turned up for the first time in 2008, and they've come every year since. So we keep getting a new group or two appear. They get wind of what we're doing, and they say, "Oh, we'll come to that," and then they don't stop coming, which is why we can be up at 17 or 18 games at times, and it can be pretty snug in the hall. When we did Hyde, we actually, I think, had 17 games, and we actually had to overspill into the small hall for a couple of the games, just because it was so full.
Wow.
And some people like very big games, so. Thinking Simon Miller, who of course has come up to get rules to the strongest, But he came with when we did Zama. So that was, when was that? 2008-9 period. He came and put on a big Command and Colours game, huge game, Miller-esque, shall we say? But it was in his early days of he hadn't quite got complete madness at that point. It was a lot of lead, a lot of metal on that table, and a lot of elephants and a lot of figures, and he did Command and Colours. It was a very long game, and there's a lot of people around it playing the game. And I think it's partly from that he then started developing his to the strongest, because he enjoyed the spectacle of it. But I think going back to about the rules, undoubtedly Warhammer started to spawn the 28mm figures coming in, and there are, to some extent, there was a big 15s kind of lost their way a little bit relative to those, although it's probably at the end of the day still fairly de-reconstructed in that sense, and I'm still 15 at heart, although I also enjoy painting 28s as well, so I play with all of them, and indeed the smaller people too, the 6mm and so on. But the great thing about Battle Day is we get all of those as well. So we don't just get different rule sets, we get different figure scales as well. We got one group who come, the Scimitar group from the Midlands, they always play with plastics, always play with the 20mm your Esky and your Rebel plastics. And similarly, Graham Evans comes, and he's come a few times over the years, that often he's done Matrix games or other rule sets. He again also uses the 20mm plastic. We get people with the 28s, we get people with 15s, we get 6mm, we've had 2mm, we've had 10mm. There's one group that come, they always do 6 or 10mm. They started out with Warmaster Ancients, and they've progressed on to Hail Caesar now. And so when they start coming, they always keep coming. And so the danger is we're going to keep getting bigger. Maybe one day we'll burst out of the building, but thus far we're just about okay. I haven't done the sums for this year yet, and I'm a little bit nervous actually because I think we've got a lot of games coming this year. So
Oh, brilliant.
we'll see.
I mean, that's a nice problem to have, though, isn't it? I mean, it's a
It
great
is.
testament to what you've managed to do there.
It is, and it's much better to have too many than too few. And when you first start it, I guess a little bit like when you publish the first magazine, is anyone going to buy it? Is anyone going to turn up? That was the question. And you do have that worry, and we get the groups come, they bring their game, and the game organizer has got to actually plan how to set it up and how it's going to work with their rule set. Do they need to tweak the rules? When are they going to start the game? Are there any special features they need to think about? And you've seen in the Telamon, the article I've written in Telamon, where I've tried to bring out some of the things that game organisers need to think about. And they will turn up with 2 people or 10 or however many. But we also get a good amount of people that just show up and just either want to just look round, but most of them actually want to turn up and play and join in one of the games. Some of them again write to me and say, I'd like to play in the Armati game, please. So I let the Armati team know there's another player coming, and everyone is always happy to take people. It's part of how it works. But some people just show up and join the one they like the look of.
Oh, right.
Or even they get press gang. They're wandering past the game, and an arm comes out, grabs them. Oh, we need a player. You do. Invariably, they come again. Those people as well. So we get good take up from that. So the floaters, as we like to call them, they're important to it as well. So I would say to anybody out there who wants to come along, come along, and you'll be welcomed.
Fantastic.
And you'll be shoved into a game before you know it.
Fantastic. I mean, there's a couple of things that popped in my head. First of all, en passant there, you mentioned the rise or the rebirth, if you like, of the 20 mil, 1/72, call it what you will, plastic figure. A company that immediately springs to mind with me is Zvezda. The entrance of Zvezda to the market with their exquisite sculpts. I mean, just there's a website called Plastic Soldier Review, isn't there? Which reviews all kind of plastic stuff. Which if listeners, if you haven't ever been to Plastic Soldier Review, just put that in Google and you'll end up there, because they review every set of, as it suggests, 20 mil plastic soldiers that comes out. And some of the modern products from people like Zvezda are astonishing. I mean, I'm thinking of their Macedonians and Achaemenid Persians, for example, which I've got quite a few of tucked away on the shelf. Don't ask me whether they're all painted yet, but they're there because they're beautiful. And it's kind of like the coming of age. We think back to Airfix, and as I mentioned, those ancient Britons with the wagon wheel chariots, and compared to that, this is a completely different league. These are beautifully sculpted little tiny human beings, perfectly proportioned. So that's one thing. And I mean, the other thing is, from a practical terms, saying people can just turn up. Is there an entrance fee to the battle day?
So we charge £10 for people.
Very reasonable.
And that's and it's been held at that for some years now. We held it at £7 for many years. We subsidised the event a little bit, but basically it's just to go towards the hall hire and the table hire. And we need to hire a lot of tables. So many games. It's the society partly pays for it to cover it. And I go around. People just turn up and pay on. They don't even pay on the door. They just come in. And I wander around with my sheet of paper saying, "Have you paid yet?" People get asked several times, "Have they paid?" And I just, they say, "No, I've already paid." Really? Oh yeah, there we are. Yeah, so pay early, pay often is my watchword. But so it's very relaxed, and juniors and students are free. We don't charge students. We encourage them. In fact, we've got quite a few of the players that come now. I remember them as 10 and 12-year-olds, and now here we are 16 years later. They're all somewhat older. So it's nice to see that progression come through. So do bring the youngsters too. That's something again, we need to encourage more of.
Absolutely, I think that's one of the things where the events are a good thing. From my point of view, we often talk about the greying of the hobby, and one of the things that, of course, is so good where there is a show of any kind, a live event. actually being able to bring the kids and show them and them being able to join in, which is the critical thing, isn't it? It turns from this
Yeah,
abstract
absolutely.
notion of, oh god, dad and his soldiers, and it becomes a real thing that's
Yeah.
happening in front of them, and it's a fun thing. And particularly, as you say, because it's showcasing so many different rule sets. And I think one of the problems, that, if you like, that the Games Workshop and its ilk did, I think there was a danger, or there was a perceived danger, that there would be some kind of monoculture overtaking our hobby.
Yeah.
I mean, Games Workshop had the cheek, of course, to call it their hobby, the Games Workshop hobby. We all knew it was our hobby first. That's the first thing, and this danger of there being this kind of monoculture. Whereas I think it's I mean, it's one of those things I talk about quite a lot, because it can be intimidating to people, because ours is not a monoculture. I mean, not only do we cover everything, all bits of recorded history, imagined history, fantasy, science fiction, but also so many different scales, so many different ways of approaching the subject matter, so many different rule sets. I mean, I think this is fascinating. I think we're going to have you on the show again after the battle day to talk about how it all went, because I'm really fascinated about this comparison of rule set, particularly when you've also en passant mentioned there things like commands and colors, which I think a lot of people are now familiar with the fact that I quite enjoy commands and colors. It has its drawbacks, but as a kind of crossover board game / miniatures game, it's actually a really useful kind of format. And I was really interested to hear what you said there about Simon Miller having first been taken with the idea of a gridded surface by using commands and colors. Now, I mean, obviously, you're more familiar with what goes in the society. Are a lot of society members people who play commands and colors?
Yeah, I think there are quite a few. Certainly, Battle Day usually has at least one, often two, and on occasions 3 command and colors games. So,
oh, wow.
The Scimitar guys, when they come with their 20 mil plastics, they always play command and colors. Have the guys from now I've got to get this right. Are they from Huntingdon? I think they're from Huntingdon. Was it
right?
Keynes? Oh, I get them. I think. Oh, dear.
Don't worry.
One group, they come, they play with 28 mil, lovely figures. They play it again, a nice big hex map. They always play command and colors. And John Dorinkovich and Andrew Brentnell, they often come.
Of course, yeah.
With their they use the commercial Callistra, is it that make it? The Geo.
Oh yeah, Callistra. Yeah.
Hex, they use that. It looks lovely. So they're very keen on that. They often play that with 15 mil. So there's always at least one game. Sometimes, as I say, sometimes more. So we do sometimes get different rule sets being used twice or 3 times. Which in itself is quite interesting to see how they're doing it, what's different and what's not different. But we do get all sorts of rules being used. Sometimes it's so we have someone coming along using WRG 6th edition. A bit of
wow.
a moment. Yeah, it's fun, and people using the new sets of rules.
Yeah.
Interestingly, we don't get many people using the sort of rules that are used in competitions.
Right.
They don't get used very much. So
that's interesting. So, of course, let me interject immediately now. So what rule sets do you primarily see as competition rule sets as opposed to casual games?
So I would say in my head I would think of Field of Glory having been introduced primarily written by a group of guys who liked a competition game, and I think it'll be taken up in the competition circuit. And I don't think we've seen them at Battle Day more than a couple of times.
Oh right, that's really interesting.
Yeah. Then there's a set of rules what they call Art de la Guerre.
Oh yes, I've heard of those. Yeah.
Used, I believe, extensively in competitions. Never seen at Battle Day. Never seen.
Oh, how interesting.
Yeah. DBM actually not seen very often.
Right.
And so don't forget what this stems from is people need to want to come along and refight the battle using those rules. And I think the people that use those rules, a lot of them were using them for competition because that was what they like to use them for.
Oh, I see.
Now, DBMM, Phil Barker's sort of final adaptation is, at least we think it will be his final adaptation of them. They've been coming pretty much every year. I mean, they must be into their 14th year of the 16 now. Same group of guys, more or less. There's a few. Head, one of them, comes. Phil himself and Sue, his wife Sue, come along to play from time to time. They come up. So they if they can make it, that's come regularly. Armati is seen every year. We have Big Battle DBA is quite popular. That comes.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
because you sort of double up the numbers for that.
Absolutely, yeah. And you see, so last year Paul Murgatroyd came with his 6mm based on, I think, 25mm scale bases.
Oh, right. So real mass look.
They absolutely looked. So last year we did Paracatini. Can I say it?
Which is difficult to say, yes.
Yes. The big battle between Antigonus One-Eye and Eumenes of Cardia.
Yeah.
And Pike Fest, lots of pike. And his setup with the 6mm on these big bases just looked absolutely stunning.
Wow.
We have I give out slips and people can vote for best terrain and best game. And I take the votes in and they win prizes for these things. And we also have more spurious prizes. I paint up a few figures and they give them out as prizes for Antigonus of the day, Eumenes of the day, whatever, or the silver shields of the day, whatever it is. So whoever's done an act of daring do with that particular unit or with that particular general, they will get the prize I've painted up of that general and so on. So it's a very light-hearted, spurious thing. In fact, you can get it for being killed in the first turn as well. You can kind of get the prize for all sorts of reasons.
Fantastic.
We have a little ceremony at the end where we hand them out for
Oh, that's brilliant. I mean, there's so much coming up in this conversation, and that interesting kind of divergence of the rule sets that people see primarily as competition rule sets and the rule sets that are more for casual games, that sort of stuff. That's a whole subject in itself, I'm sure. The other thing, of course, you mentioned in passing it, Phil Barker himself, who's still going, who I imagine must be in his 80s now.
Well, in fact, he must be. He must be late 80s now. I'm trying to think. If he's 90 yet. He's certainly older and less steady. But it's great to see him. He comes for a day at the conference.
Oh, fantastic!
Sue and Phil both come to that for a day. It's always great to see them. I mean, in my view, the guy is a genius. He can be much maligned, and there are aspects to his approach to things that have rubbed people up the wrong way over the years. But when you think that what he did with those editions, the early editions, and then what he did with 7th edition, which was to take it in a completely different way, which I personally thought was brilliant. And then he went off to Wargames Development and came up with DBA, and then developed DBM from that. All of those, I think, really, the hobby owes him a lot. And he was made a life vice president of the society many years ago, and well deserved, in my view. The hobby owes him a lot for the efforts he's put in over the years.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and his wife Sue Laughlin, she's kind of maintaining the Phil Barker's website, where you can, in fact, download a load of old editions of the rule sets, can't you?
Absolutely. I mean, Sue herself has been a great stalwart of the society, and the society owes her a lot as well, because she's been a mover and shaker for us for many years as well. And you're right, she's keeping things going on that side of things. And I mean, I remember reading about her ancient British army in that purple book way back when.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. The Airfix Guide to Ancient Gaming.
She had an ancient Britain, as I recall. But yes.
Yeah, that's right. Fantastic. No, I mean, all power to them both. I mean, Phil's one of those people, I've never actually met him in person, which would be another reason to come along to one of your do's to get the chance to meet him while he's still with us. Because it's like, I remember I was lucky enough to meet Don Featherstone when he was very elderly. He came to Salute. And I can't remember what year that would have been, probably about 2006, 2007, something like that, which was his, as it turned out, his sort of last public outing, really. And he sadly went downhill, fairly quickly after that. But you're absolutely right. Phil Barker is just one of those towering figures in the hobby that he's almost got this kind of mythology that's grown up around him, which of course, the reality is, as we know from history, that people who have mythologies around them, they're just all in the middle of it all. They're just ordinary people, and it's other people that apply that mythology to them. And I'm going to have to see if I can get to talk to him. People will love it. I mean, you mentioned Phil Barker there, of course. I mean, I've got here, I've got loads of questions. We're bound to run out of time at some point because we would have been chatting for an hour and a half. But let's try and squeeze in a couple here. So we've mentioned a whole host of different rule sets and stuff there. So when you play, what rule sets do you tend to use? Have you got any particular favourites? And if so, why is that?
So one rule set that I enjoy playing, I go out and play with a bunch of guys based in the Northampton area. Phil Steele, who for many years was president of the society, does a lot on the shows circuit for the North, shows North, as he likes to call it. Does a lot for the society and the Battlefield Trust and the Northampton Battlefield Society. And Graham Evans, who tends to host the games up there. In his shed quarters. You may have wargaming for grown-ups.
Oh, absolutely. He did an article for me in Battlegames, I think, or Major Wargames.
So Graham is absolute top man. We play with his plastics, his Svezda and Macedonian Persians and so on. And typically there we use Neil Thomas's Ancient and Medieval Wargaming.
Oh yes, he reaches across to the shelf and brandishes. Of course, I've got the Neil Thomas list here.
Which, do you know what? Those rules are very simple, but we get a satisfactory game out of it, and we've tweaked it a little bit. Graham writes a lot of his own rules. Principally, that's what he does really, and so he's tweaked them a little bit, but not much. We just work out, make elephants a bit better, and we work on those. But we find them good fun. We've tried different sets of rules. We've tried we tried Impetus for a little while. Played that for a few times and didn't quite do it for us in the end, I think. And we will play Armati. Those guys play Armati a bit. I'm happily play that. I'll happily play DBM. I don't play it very often. I play once a year. I go to a competition. Actually, I went a couple of weekends ago. It's my yearly competition fix.
All right.
John Graham Lee down in the West. They have a competition in Frome where it's a very tightly themed competition. Each army can only be picked once. So they select 20 armies. There's 20 because there are 20 of us that go down, and you get to select it in reverse order of your average score in the competition for the last 3 years.
Oh,
it's
right.
It's a bit like the draft in the US, where the worst team gets the first pick. In theory, the worst player gets the first pick of the army. So if there is a super army, the worst player gets to pick it.
Oh, right.
It's not quite how it works, but we all enjoy doing that. So I go down and play that. Quite happily play a bit of DBM. I think they're a reasonable set of rules. But I play in a broad church. I'm happy to have a go at anything. I enjoyed a bit of Warhammer historical in the back WAB in the back ancient battles in the day. I'll happily have a shot at anything. So I've probably missed a few out there. So the rule set at the moment that I'm most fond of, I will say, this is Dan Mercy's Dux Malorum.
Okay.
So I absolutely love my son. He's up in Cambridge doing his PhD at the moment, but when he comes down, we always play Dux Malorum. We both love it. I get my Dark Age armies out. And we play those. I just think they are just, every time we play, we find something new and different about them, different way to think about the game.
Yeah.
We enjoy the mechanisms, and naturally, being a wargamer, I'm taking that square peg out of this square hole, and I'm trying to hammer it into a round hole now, because I'm trying to develop some Macedonian Persian rules based on some of the same mechanisms.
Oh, really?
But actually using a grid-based system. But anyway, that's for another day.
That sounds fascinating, though.
I put that on at the conference actually this year, so I gave it a bit of a run out. But so yeah, look, I play anything. I'm happy to try anything, really.
Yeah. I'm fascinated to hear you mention Dux Balorum there and Dan Mersey, because he's a mate. I've known him for quite some time, and of course he used to write it for the magazine for me quite a lot. And yes, he's a real ludologist, isn't he? He's a really clever guy at dreaming up game mechanisms that just seem to work. And I suppose you could say that his rules are also Marmite. Like, quite a lot of people who write rules, people consider them to be Marmite. Oh, that's not quite what I'm looking for in my game. But if you're someone who quite enjoys a game just for the sake of a game occasionally, a bit like Commands and Colours, that's definitely Marmite, isn't it?
Yeah.
Definitely worth giving a try. And of course, he was lucky he got that published by Osprey Publishing a few years ago now. Gosh, it's been around longer than I probably care to remember now, but
that was his first one, I think, wasn't it? In the Osprey series.
Yeah, that's right. Because before he did the Lion Rampants and all that kind of stuff, that's right.
So I remember Glotter of Ravens back in the day when he.
Oh gosh, yes.
Wargame Services published, and
that was Andrei Sviligoy, or whatever his name was, wasn't it? I can't remember. I'll have to go and check that out. But yes, well, a good mention for Dan there. He's a top man, and he's currently working for PSC Games.
Yeah, he sent me a trial copy of his game, so I've got to review it. That's one of my next tasks actually, is to
write right.
Shop. I've got it out. I've made all the things up. I've pushed a few bits around, but I need my son to come down from Cambridge so we can have a go with it. But that's the next plan.
So something else I've kind of got mentioned. In terms of how your own gameplay, how important is the look of the game for you? Are you someone who's more interested in kind of the game itself and the playability and the outcome, or are you also someone who enjoys the visual feast of wargaming and spends a lot of time painting or making terrain and stuff?
I think probably the visual part is very important to me. I mean, I probably paint more than I play. I enjoy painting. Part of I have a reasonably stressful day job, and actually painting just zips it all away. And I can just go away and just concentrate. And I don't paint quickly. I paint relatively slowly. I don't paint especially well, but I'm adequate when I want to be. I'm always trying different things. I'm trying to do it quickly or slowly. I paint 15s, I paint 28s, so big things, enjoy that, but so that the visual part is important for sure,
right?
But I do things like so my son and I have also been playing a bit of sharp practice.
Right.
So I went onto the blog, the Lardon blog, and there was a great series of articles where Richard Clark was making his buildings for the peninsula, and he took existing buildings and then pimped them, basically, built some more things, and he with the attitude that I'm no good at making terrain, but if I can do it, you can too. And I thought, damn it, I'll have a go. So I've made some of those myself. I really enjoyed doing it. I have to say, all power to that. To Rich and that. I very much enjoyed his podcast. I mean, that was what moved me to drop your line. Actually, I really enjoyed it, and I just thought this is what I listen for. I do enjoy the look. The look is important, but not to the extent where I've got to have beautifully painted 28mm figures marching out. And that's I do like a nice painted figure, and my Minden 7 Years War figures, which we mustn't talk about, they have to be exquisite. My 48-man regiments.
Fantastic!
Have to be with eight officers and drummers and standard bearers to go with it as well. But they have to be exquisite. But most of the time, I'm quite happy to slap a bit of flesh on and put a flesh wash on, and thank you, that's the job done. I don't have to highlight too much. But look and feel is important, but narrative of the game is also important as well. And I think that's partly why I like some of the Dux Balorum games as well. You can feel a narrative from it. But
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as you would have heard, because I'm getting back into Ancients via the Imaginations for it, and we've gone for Warhammer Ancients Battles because me and the pals who are doing it, we decided we quite like the idea that there's more personality in that rule
Yes.
set because you
Yeah.
have the heroes and leaders
Yeah.
and musicians, all the rest of it. We'll see how it goes. Who knows? We may end up going back to WRG 5th edition by the time we're over.
Try the original Tony Bath rules as well. They're quite.
Oh, absolutely,
They're quite.
absolutely. I've
They
got them in the Don
because
Featherstones.
he used them for Hyboria. So
Absolutely. Hyboria, we haven't even touched on Hyboria.
indeed.
Before we do, one of the things I wanted to say was quite interesting, talking about you like, a nice looking army and terrain and stuff. Of course, one of the accusations that's often leveled at Ancients games is empty table syndrome, where and I suppose that it's just one of those historical facts that a lot of ancient battles were fought on wide open plains with not much on them, because that's the best place to deploy an ancient's army.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. I mean, you can go back and read, Victor Davis Hanson's The Western Warfare kind of thing. That's how you decided things. You showed up, they showed up. You got your pointed sticks out and you set two. And as you say, why would you do that in a rocky terrain? Why would you do that on the hill? You did it where there was plenty of room. And so yes, there is.
And especially if you had chariots, of course. I mean, a rocky terrain's an absolute nightmare for anyone with chariots.
Persians, Darius at Gargamel had his lackeys out clearing the rocks off the ground for his chariots.
Absolutely.
So, it is. Look, one of the things we try to do with Battle Day is to have different battles that have got. There's some of them undoubtedly on a plane. So last year, very much.
Yeah.
But Telamon, a little bit different. There's a involved in it.
Tell us about Telamon. That's a good line, isn't it? Tell us about Telamon.
So Telamon is a battle fought between the Republican Romans, so the early Roman army, and a group of Gallic tribes, an alliance of Gallic tribes. These Gallic tribes were based in northern Italy, so at the time before Rome had conquered the whole of Italy.
Yeah.
And but Rome was encroaching, and they were gradually feeling the squeeze. And I think they probably had the idea that maybe their days were numbered, and so they kind of said, right, we've got to fight them. And this happened a few times over the years, and I think you read Duncan's article in the Slingshot, and great bit of sort of history there. But essentially, they thought, well, we better fight now, because in the end it'll be too late. So they went on a bit of a rampage through parts of northern Italy and middle Italy. Actually got some mercenary figures out from the Gaisati, or however you want to say it, reputedly fought naked. These mercenaries from across the Alps came to join them, and they went on the rampage. Were on their way home with all their loot, being hotly pursued by a Roman consular army. And meanwhile, another Roman consular army had landed from Sicily, and actually they ran slap back into them, bang into them.
Oh, so God, right.
They've essentially got cannons to the front and cannons to the rear, and and they basically had to fight back to the war battle. Now, we've not done anything like that before, so it's quite a different concept. Again, how are rules going to sort that out? How are you going to play the game? A couple of people have already said they're going to set up with a gap between the tables, so the Gallic player can actually stand in the middle and fight half of his army one way and half of his army the other.
Oh, fantastic!
Rather than having to reach into the middle. There'll be a few different ways of people doing it. But yes, it was a bit of a last stand, and I'm afraid in the end it didn't end well for the Gauls. It never does it, when they fight the Romans? But one of the Roman generals was very keen on trying to defeat them before the other Roman general turned up, so he could have all the glory. I'm afraid his head ended up on the end of a spear, which goes quite well for him. So there's lots to play for in the game. You've got a couple of Roman armies vying for who's going to do the most damage. So I think there's a bit of player interest there. The Gallic player's got to think: can he break through? Should he fight a defensive battle? Should he try and push through one of the armies? It's going to be an interesting see what people do with it, and that's always the great fun of the Battle Day, seeing how they interpret it, how they play it. Some people play test it 3 or 4 times before they bring it. Others just show up and give it a go. So again, each to their own.
Yeah. I mean, I'm flicking
great
while you're talking. I'm looking at the latest January-February 2019 issue of Slingshot, which has got beautiful piece of cover art on, by the way. But also, yeah, I can see your article here, the Battle Pack, what you call the Battle Pack, which basically explains to people, what options they've got to put the game on, and then a really extensive and rather beautiful article by Duncan Head with some gorgeous photos of beautifully painted miniatures and some lovely maps. I'm a man who loves maps, and there's some lovely maps in here, some of which have got that kind of 3D effect which says that, has someone been using Google Earth or something of the kind here to create these, showing where they actually are on, placed in what is now, of course, modern Italy. A fascinating, I can say, looking at this, it's a fascinating campaign I knew nothing about, I have to confess, till this came up, and God, that looks like an amazing situation. And as you say, because it's before, it's the full empire of Rome where they just stomped over everyone and were then heading abroad, because it's kind of still on northern Italian territory. And that's actually the bit of Italy I know and love the best, actually, because I've got relatives out in northern Italy. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
Yes, in those days, the Romans did sometimes lose. Not very often, but sometimes.
Yeah. Before they just became a meat grinder kind of machine. So, I mean, we're kind of reaching the point where we need to think about wrapping up, heading towards a 2-hour conversation, which I'm delighted about.
It's gone by in a flash, isn't it?
Gone by in a flash. So you've told us about your games day and stuff. So kind of let's look to the future a bit. I mean, so where do you see, what's the future of the Society of Ancients? And also one of the questions I think, is worth asking is, where do you think there is areas it could still do better, but on contrasting with that, what are the things you think the Society of Ancients already does really well?
Well, let's start with the well. I think Slingshot is a great read. Hopefully, you're obviously reading it, which is good. I think anyone who gets it usually appreciates the articles. Not every article will be to everyone's taste, but generally speaking, I think that's our gold standard. That's important to us to keep that going at the quality and try to improve it. I mean, you yourself have commented, we've gone colour, and we've gone more colour over the years, and the covers are, we source material for the covers now better, and so long may that continue. Justin Fulton, our current editor, is doing a great job for us. So let's keep that going. I think the Battle Day clearly is something we've done well. It's been going 16 years. It's a mainstay of many members' calendars, and so that's great. This year, Saturday the 30th of March, and people ink it in before they get to the following. After they come home from the last one, they like to know what the next one is. They're asking me what the battles are. In fact, I bowed to popular demand this year, and I actually announced 2 battles at the same time. So next year, 2020, will be Bosworth.
Oh, right.
So I'm trying to give people an extra year to prepare now.
Yeah.
I always just used to give them a year or so, or even 9 months by the time I got round to announcing it. But I finally bowed to popular demand, and I've gone 1 year ahead now.
Yeah, so I can understand with all that heraldry that needs painting for Bosworth.
Well, don't forget, a lot of all the knights by that stage were just wearing tabards and things. It was just
that's true.
Just shiny suits. So actually, in some ways, easier. Not only the flags to do. But what do we want to do going forward? Well, look, the conference is a good example of something we've been trying to develop. So the conference took place originally in the 90s as a 2-day weekend affair, and it died out in the mid-90s for one reason or another. And so I thought, why don't I try and bring it back? Roy Boss, the current president of the society, he put it to me that I'd got Battle Day now working well, and it was time to think about something else. And so I thought, okay, we'll give the conference idea a go. We set it up. We got 20 odd people the first year. We've run 3 successive years, and we're running the 4th this year, and actually are planning the 5th year as well.
Oh, right.
So we're sort of dual planning those 2 as well. And
so how many people do you expect? How many did you get last year?
So we got about 30 last year. It was in November. So we tried to run them more or less 6 months apart, the 2 events. We got about 30, and we're hoping to get, maybe to get 35 this year, because we started out around 20 and we've just gone up a little bit. People who come back if they can.
Right.
And then in the main, and then of course you get a few new people who couldn't make it the last year, and so hopefully we build from that.
Sure. So what happens at the conference? I mean, what's the difference between the conference and Battle Day?
So the way we tend to run it is, so we will have a Saturday morning session, a Saturday afternoon session, a Sunday morning, and a Sunday afternoon. So 4 broad sessions. Typically, we'll start off with some form of presentational talk. So, for example, that article you were referencing that Duncan has written in the Slingshot, he actually gave that article as a talk at the conference.
Oh, right.
And with slides and so on, and on the big screen. So we'll have, typically the first hour will be 45-minute presentation with some Q&A. And then after that, a number of groups or a number of people will run games. And there'll be anywhere from 3 to 5 games for people to join, whichever ones they fancy going to.
Right.
And those games could be rules on development. So, for example, I put my new rules that I'm working on for Macedonian Persians. I ran that as a workshop. I had a few people join that, which was nice. Or they can be related to the talk. So, for example, this year we had Roy Boss and Matt Bennett, the academic, Matt Bennett, medieval academic. They talked about Normans and Byzantines in the sort of 11th century battles, and then they put on 3 simultaneous Armati games for people to join and play Byzantine battles. So it was themed on their talk. So people can bring a skirmish game. They can bring. Phil Steele has brought his DVA, refighting some DVA battles, ancient battles with his DVA setups. Basically, people come with ideas. Please come with an idea. Graham Evans brought his Matrix game, which making the arguments, which I noticed came up actually last week.
With Mark. Yeah,
absolutely. And I love a Matrix game. I love a good argument. Who doesn't? Yeah, absolutely. You just got to ask: is this the right room for an argument?
Yes, or is it just a minor disagreement?
Yes, So the variation you get at the conference, I think, is great. And we have a conference dinner on the Saturday night. We have a great tradition that I started where we get everyone to stand up, and then we work back in time as to when they first joined the society. And when your date comes up, you have to sit down. And then we see the last men standing, the real veterans of the society. So we do that every year. That's good fun.
So that means Phil Barker wins every year.
Good old Phil doesn't stay for the dinner. So
oh bless.
So that's.
Or he would win every year.
Yeah, it's a theme. But it's partly a way of us honouring the veterans of the society. Those have been.
That's a lovely idea.
Important to recognise the heritage of the group. This year we're going to have Harry Sidebottom, the author.
Oh right, yes. I know Harry. Yeah,
he's agreed to come and give us a bit of a keynote address, as it were.
Fantastic!
Probably pre-dinner. So that's looking forward to that. We're already sort of thinking about who's going to be, what the subject topics are for the presentations, and getting the people to put the games on. We have had a few people put on games every year, and we're trying to give some of them time off for good behaviour. So we're trying to get some of the guys that have come along previous times to start putting games on. We had one presentation given the year before last by a young lad who'd Sam Marks, who was doing he'd just done his PhD or masters at London College, where he's essentially the warfare gaming. Phil Sabin runs. So he came and did a talk on partly what his thesis had been around the mercenaries of the Hellenistic world. So it's great to have some young blood talking about something. You can tell I'm very enthusiastic about the conference. I think it's a great event, and I'm hoping we can build it. I'd like to see 40, 50 more people.
Absolutely.
One thing, the War Games developments, the COW, Conference of Wargamers, is something to. If you like, that's my that's where I'd like to get it to one day. But it's not the same thing. It's not an experimental piece as such. It is more about ancient gaming, and I think there's room for the experimental games. There's room for people workshopping their game systems. and I think that's an important part of it. But there's also room for people coming along and just playing the games they want to play.
Sure.
The first year we had Paul Innes play the 3 battles of Philippi. So first morning he did it'd be Brutus versus Octavian versus Antony, was it? And then the next afternoon he did Cassius versus Antony, and then the winners of those games then went to play off in the final, as it were, on the Sunday morning. A massive game using Tactica 2 the rules, with lots and lots of Romans, many. Paul's mad; he just paints Romans all the time. But you get all sorts of things at the conference, and it's great fun. Some of us arrive on the Friday night, so we can take a bit of refreshment and have a good chat, which is always good. And then after dinner, we sometimes play some of the old society games. I don't know whether you recall Gladiolus and games like that.
Oh yes, yeah.
Written by the late Andy Gittins, who actually was the one that got me into mainstream wargaming again after a bit of a hiatus. So it's always nice to play those. Yeah, the conference is great, and people should come. Watch out for it.
And where is the conference held?
So the conference has, for the first 3 years, was held at the Chesterford Grange Hotel in Kenilworth, near Warwick.
Okay.
And it's going to be there again this year. And the dates are the 2nd and 3rd of November.
Fantastic.
There'll be coming out about it in due course. Sorry, I'm rambling on.
No. It's absolutely fantastic. I mean, everyone who listens to a podcast, there's nothing better than hearing someone who's so enthusiastic about their subject, and the fact that you're so clearly enthusiastic about your, what you do and the society. That's absolutely brilliant, Richard. I suppose we ought to think about actually kind of wrapping up. There's kind of one. I've got a question here. What does it cost to join the Society of Ancients, and where can people find out more? That's, obviously they will go to, soa.org.
Yeah, absolutely. Go to the Society. If you type Society of Ancients in your Google, you'll find us. Well, you might find some other strange places as well, but you'll find us on that. There is a join the society. It's relatively straightforward to join the society. It's I think it's £28 at the moment, and for that you get your 6 issues, the next 6 issues, bi-monthly, and you referenced it earlier, the discounts that you can get.
Exactly. Yes.
It is my contention and many people's contention that you can save the entire cost of your annual subscription if you buy as much metal as some of us do. You can save your entire subscription, and by the discounts that many manufacturers very generously offer our members.
Absolutely. I mean, it goes from, there's a long list here. I don't know, 40, 50 different manufacturers, ranging from First Core at the top to Ziston down the bottom, with everyone in between. There's, Atchison, Curtis Miniatures, Donington Miniatures, Eureka, Hinchliffe, because they're still around, of course. Immortal Miniatures, Carawans. Now, Caravanserai Publishers, let's mention them, give them a place of honour. Ancient Warfare magazine. Now, this is something which, of course, it's been around a few years now. I've lost track of quite how long it's been around. But obviously, Jasper, who, I write for Wargame Soldiers and Strategy magazine. It's a sister magazine to that. Now, that's a magazine that must have made a big difference to, if you like, the profile of ancient history and ancient wargaming.
Yeah, I think so, and I love it. It's great, and the artwork's to die for, and
isn't it just?
And it's just, you look at it and you think, wow, that's just fantastic. And the articles you get in there, some of them are on subjects that aren't necessarily my favourite bit, but then some of them are just wonderful. When you get people like Duncan writing it, but you get great writers in it as well, and it takes up the mantle, and runs with it again and takes it further. Long may it continue. And I'm a subscriber, and I get Medieval Warfare as well, which obviously started out a little bit afterwards, but that is of the same ilk. It's. I have to buy all the magazines. I've always bought all of them because
bless your heart, sir.
I remember the dismay when Battle collapsed. When Battle disappeared and was taken into military modelling, and it survived for a little bit there, and then Practical Wargamer came out, and that did all right for a while. I've still got all the copies of that. And then obviously miniature war game. Duncan started miniature war games, and I had to buy every issue because I remember the time when there was nothing. And so I've always liked to support all of them, and I've always enjoyed reading the magazines. But I do credit your Battlegames with. I went through a bit of a period when I was struggling for my wargaming mojo.
Right.
And I wasn't really sure why I was wargaming anymore. I was bored, I think, with the whole thing, and I credit Battlegames and Charles Grant's articles in Tabletop Teasers, making me think, oh, I've got that book somewhere, the WIG Tabletop Teasers, and then the program War Game Scenarios or whatever, and all that, and it just it did, of course, lead me down the dark path of starting to collect Minden Miniatures 7 Years War figures, but
not my fault.
So, but which I've been doing. I've actually got some hussars to base later. Yes, it did. I don't know. It struck a chord with me that the Battlegames magazines, and as I say, I've kept them. They're the only ones I've kept of the more recent ones. I'm afraid these.
Bless your heart, sir. Bless your heart.
Those first, I don't know, however many, 30 or whatever before and even after the merger, actually, with Miniature War Games, I think it was the same magazine in my view. But there's pure gold in some of those magazines. So almost like the pure gold that was in the very early Miniature War Games. There was some great stuff there.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yes, there was a lot of really interesting people like Arthur Harmon, who sadly we don't hear a huge amount from nowadays. What a clever man! Came up with clever game systems. Always thought outside the box. Absolutely.
And so I've been starting to get enticed into the Sudan recently.
Oh, have you now?
I bought the Go Strong into the Desert book from the Perrys that they did, and it's been festering on my shelf for a bit. And I saw I don't know whether you've seen the blog with Pajamas Through the Desert.
No, that's ringing a bell. I haven't seen it recently, but I've heard of it. Yes.
Chap in Australia, and
yes.
He's taken. It's a real labour of love. He's taken the Peter Gilder rules for the Sudan, which you may remember from what was it that Duncan published? Those yellow magazines. It wasn't the normal.
Yes, it was. The War Games World.
That's the one. Yeah, and Peter Gilder.
There was only 5 of them. Yeah,
exactly. And Peter Gilder wrote a series of articles about his Sudan. All his connoisseur figures, and anyway, the chap whose name I've forgotten, which is terrible, who does With Pajamas Through the Desert. Is it Carl something? Oh goodness me! My apologies to him for forgetting his name off the top of my head. Anyway,
I know exactly who you mean. Yes, and I can't remember.
Got these rules together from various sources, I think. And
was it Carlo Pagani?
I think it is. That's Carlo Pagani. Is the correct answer. Well done. Spare my blushes. But he's lovingly put them together. He's published them, and he's collected the connoisseur figures himself as well. And I'm afraid that I'm on the edge of diving in, and so far I've resisted, but it's probably only a matter of time because obviously the figures are all still available. But one of my friends, Graham Evans, has written his own rules and plays with 15 mil. I've made him get them out again recently. We've been massacring a few fuzzy wuzzies recently in the time-honoured fashion, or being cut to pieces ourselves in the way the rules work. But I do like the mechanisms there, and I'm now taking those, working on my own set of rules for Romans in Britain.
Oh, okay.
So similar concept. Romans have to come out. They're all based on, if you recall, based on the Pony Wars rules.
Absolutely. Yes.
Which were great.
Peter Berry.
Back way back when. Yes. And so again, the idea is everyone plays the Romans. The Celts are generated, umpires generated, and a few chance cards to create the Roman Emperor suddenly arriving, going to meet one of his old veteran mates somewhere, and you've got to suddenly rescue him. I've even laid my hands on some of those old Metal Magic Asterix figures, so Asterix might make an appearance. Right. So
fantastic.
That's a long-term project, but we'll see.
I want to say in response to when you're talking about the Sudan, of course, it just dawned on me. I'm going to the Don Featherstone commemoration, memorial weekend do late March, and they're doing the Sudan in very much that kind of style. So you've got the British on the march, assailed on all sides by
Yeah.
various forms of dervish or whatever, and it should be great fun. I shall be reporting on that, and as a patron, of course, you will be benefiting from a couple of extra days. I kind of it was almost sort of fun to say. I've said it's wonderful that you're one of my patrons as well as in the Society of Ancients, and you've been able to come on the show. It's always nice for me to invite my own patrons onto the show, which is rather nice. It brings things kind of full circle. So I have to ask you. I mean, obviously you subscribe to Battlegames and stuff, which is fantastic. What made you decide to come on board as a patron with this?
I think actually developing the same thing that I've already expressed, that I remember the day when there was nothing, and so I wanted to embrace everything that comes along, give everything a chance. And I read now the other magazines digitally, the WSS, which I enjoy. I enjoy your articles in that, and people like Rich Clark's articles and so on. And I still get miniature war games digitally, and I still get Wargames Illustrated digitally.
Yeah.
So I still look through them, although I don't read some of them as much as I used to. But I do. I think it's important to support new ventures, because if we don't have them, they'll be gone, and then there'll be nothing, and that's a bad thing. And I think learning about the hobby, learning about different things. That's why I like the idea of the conference and the battle. They're getting people together, discussing things important for the hobby, I think, and so valuable from that. But I'll be honest, I liked your stuff on Battlegames, and so I thought I'll probably really like your stuff on the Patreon as well. So,
bless your heart.
Indeed. And so, I thought I would enjoy it. So that's, frankly, why I signed up. And
good.
I'm glad to be contributing, and I have no expectation of ceasing. So
fantastic.
I'm looking forward to the next one. Oh, that'll be me, won't it? Damn. Oh, well.
And you've done a great job. It's probably time to wrap up. We've been chatting for a couple of hours here. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Richard. It's been brilliant. And as we've been talking, my mind has just been, my neurons have been going crazy. Almost every topic we've touched on in the last couple of hours, I've thought, oh God, I need to talk to him about that. I need to talk to him about that. So I'm pretty certain I'm going to have you back on the show. One of the things I need to ask you, if you're working on your own kind of Greeks v Persians rules, I'd love to see those for sure, because that's something, that's right up my street. I think I was talking when I was talking to Mark Backhouse in the last show. I was saying, for some reason, Romans and barbarians, I mean, they're great, but they never quite lit my fire in quite the same way as the Greeks and Persians have, and that probably came down to just the way the subject was taught at school. And there was one person who, Greeks and Persians, and he was a great teacher, and the other stuff was great, I think one of the other problems can be that thinking of school visits on rainy days to Roman remains and lots of tiny shards of pottery that didn't kind of float my boat in the same way as tales of daring do of hoplites and Greeks and Thermopylae. I mean, God, what can you say? Thermopylae. Let's not get into movie renditions of Thermopylae. That's a whole other podcast, isn't it?
It
could be an interesting.
Absolutely.
Yes. It could be an interesting one.
But you're either Roman or Greek, I think. I think many war games, you're either Roman or you're Greek. I've always been Greek, and but Mark was obviously very, very solidly Roman. And,
absolutely. And it's remarkable. All that his tiny 2mm absolute brilliant creations are just an extraordinary thing. Anyway, thank you so much, Richard. It's been fantastic having you on the show. I'm going to obviously put up all the details on the show notes of how people can reach the society, how they can get to Battle Day, how they can get to the conference. Let's hope that this podcast might get you a flood of new members coming in, and you'll get the numbers at the conference that you've been looking forward to. It sounds like it absolutely deserves it.
I hope so, and it's been a pleasure to be on, Henry. I hope your listeners aren't too disappointed with me rambling on and not some more famous wargaming personality. But look, it's been a pleasure, and if people want to come along to the Battle Day or join the society or come to the conference, that's fantastic. I'd love to see them.
Brilliant. Well, yeah, if you weren't famous before, Richard, you are now.
For 5 minutes, anyway.
And on that note, we'll wrap up. Thanks to everyone for listening. Hope you've enjoyed the show. I'm sure you have. And I'll see you again next time. So thanks, Richard. Cheerio.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.